Incredible outpouring of love and the loss of David Modell. We've talked about that a lot. Obviously, big football games going on, as well as the Caps on a little bit of a torrid tear before Pittsburgh the other night, as well as the Washington Wizards and the Terps. We're playing a lot of basketball right now. Terps in the top 25, and don't look. And I know some folks don't watch the NBA on a day-to-day basis. The Wizards have sort of gotten back into this thing. Here to talk all things basketball. Nobody covers the NBA better than this guy. It's Steve Kyler. He's been a defending champion here for 2 decades at WNST. He's now with BasketballInsiders.com. You can find him there, or you can find him out on Twitter, as tens of thousands do, at Steve Kyler NBA. What's going on, Steve? Happy midseason to you here, right? This is sort of the sleepy time of the NBA where, LeBron takes games off on the road and injuries start to pile up. And I know you wrote about Chris Paul earlier this week. This is about as big an injury as you're going to have, but I guess it's coming at a time where you say, well, as long as he's back in April, right?
Yeah, you know what? This is a team that, that's been their story. And I think, unfortunately, what would have happened if Shaq and Kobe stayed together? What would have happened if Penny Hardaway and Shaq stayed together? It's going to be what would have happened if the Clippers could ever stay healthy. And this has been, now 4 seasons where it's one thing right after the other. I guess the blessing in this is that they're going to get Blake Griffin back here really soon. And, they've been without him for a big chunk of the season, and they've been, pretty much the 4th best team in the West without Blake. And historically, it's been one or the other. And, Blake's played pretty well without Chris Paul. And when you think about guys like, Jamal Crawford and the way that Doc Rivers' son, Austin Rivers, has been playing, they may have enough to hang around and see what they look like when Chris Paul comes back. The injury, they're saying surgery 6 to 8 weeks. That'll put him back in March. And there's plenty of time there if you don't dig yourself into a huge hole. But, this has been the story for the Clippers, that when they've been healthy, they've been as good as anybody, but they just haven't been healthy.
Well, when you say dig a big hole, Steve, I mean, the only hole that you can dig that really screws you is to be the 8th seed, right? Because it's very, very clear Golden State's going to do this again, or San Antonio. And I guess in the case of Golden State, they talked about taking a little bit of the foot off the gas after they signed Durant. Dude, they can't help themselves. They're just better than everyone else, right? I mean, literally, I don't think they're trying to win 70 games this year, but they're on pace to do it anyway.
Exactly. And, the one thing about the Clippers specific to the Warriors is that's who the Clippers want. And if you're the Warriors, I don't think you want them in the 8th seed. I think you'd rather have, a Utah Jazz team or a Memphis Grizzlies team that you're going to make short order of so that it doesn't become a 7-game slugfest. And what we saw last year, the Oklahoma City Thunder, when really it was kind of a 2-man team with, Durant and Westbrook, they took the Warriors to the wire and it wore them out, and then they just didn't have enough because they were banged up going into the Cavaliers. So you don't want, the first round to be a 7-game because, the Clippers fall down a little bit. But what their concern is, and this has to be a real concern, is that, look, the Utah Jazz are good. The Memphis Grizzlies are good. The New Orleans Pelicans are coming. You could slide out of the dance, and that's going to be the problem, is you can't fall out because, especially when you're coming down a stretch when you've got 10 or 12 games left to play, and you have to win them all to get in. That's where the Clippers have to, kind of be mindful. If Blake goes down again, they're going to have to make a trade. So, I don't think it's just a foregone conclusion. They can just sit out Chris Paul and make this thing, that this thing will work. But I do think that if all the teams, if they slid into the 8th seed, that's the one that probably could make the most noise.
The NBA never really surprises me. I guess that's one part of being, sort of an around the edges, a fringe fan that watches the playoffs, and I watch the Wizards. But the bad teams are bad, the good teams are good, the really bad teams are really bad. Philadelphia last year, and even this year, and Brooklyn and these other teams. But there are very few surprises. I think the way Houston's played this year has to be a huge surprise, right? I think people thought they would be good, but not this good.
Yeah, and I think that's a very fair way to say it. I looked at it and said, Mike D'Antoni, James Harden, those guys are made for each other, that neither one wants to play defense. But what's happened is, James, took a lot of the criticisms last year to heart and came in ready to play. And he's played really well, and he's leading the team in a lot of ways, not only in scoring, but leading the league in assists. He's become a passable defender. The guys they have surrounded him with, and Eric Gordon and Ryan Anderson and, Patrick Beverly and Trevor Ariza, these are complementary guys that really play well off of James. And then there's just a real kind of free-flowing way about it. They put up a ton of threes. They put up more threes. They put up 3 times as many threes as the last place 3 team in Chicago. They've lapped the Bulls literally in threes by 3. They're just putting up shots and making them, and they're playing really free-flowing. But the part that never gets talked about with Houston is just how good they've been defensively. And really over the last, 3-4 weeks, they have won their games on the defensive side of the ball. And, they brought in Jeff Bezdelik to be kind of the defensive coordinator, and Mike D'Antoni's let him do his thing. And they've got a couple of really good defensive-minded guys that have really become lockdown defenders for them. And then the rest of the guys are at least passable. And now the Rockets are that team that, is probably in that hunt. I think the Rockets are as good as San Antonio. I think the Rockets are as good as the LA Clippers. We'll see if the Rockets are going to be as good as the Warriors, but they feel like they match up well.
Well, it would be interesting if they get together later on in the year. I always like watching the Rockets play because they do have a certain toss it around and shoot it up type of presence. You mentioned Jeff Bezdelik. You mentioned Trevor Ariza through Houston connections. That brings me to the Wizards. I don't know that we buried them back at Thanksgiving and, going through the holidays, and certainly it was a better December for them. But look up. They're a couple games over 500 right now. They're playing better basketball. I think they certainly have to get more off their bench. I mean, I don't know how far you can go with just 5 players. The problem has been their bench. But, in the Southeast Division, sort of banging around, Atlanta's sort of emerged again as we expected them to do. But I tell you what, the Wizards look like they're going to be in the playoffs at least. They might see Cleveland in the first round, but they're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And, it was funny. I talked with somebody really close to that the top of that organization. And it was like, you guys got to make a trade, right? And their answer was no. We just need to get right. We need to get right physically. We need to get right spiritually. And, we need to get out of each other's heads. And that's really what has changed for them. And when you look at kind of how they're playing now, a lot of that dysfunction that was there in November has gone away. And, it's a little different because last year, if you remember, they got out to kind of a pretty decent start, and then they ran into January and the floor just fell out from under them. So, it seems like they figured out how to fix some of this stuff. I agree with you. I'm not sure that they're deep enough to really be a challenger, but they're deep enough and good enough and at this point healthy enough to compete. And we'll see what that ends up being. We still have the trade deadline here, on February 23rd, and they do have things they could move in trade, and we'll see what shakes loose on that. But if the Wizards could get one more guy, they might be in that hunt for Boston and Toronto in terms of being the second best team in the East.
Well, and they certainly have been there before in the playoffs, and this year looked like, wow, they might really stink. Well, they don't stink, and we found that much out. And, I guess Scott Brooks isn't going to get, the credit until they get into a playoffs and win a series. I don't think he got a whole lot of credit in Oklahoma City as well. He's really been a stabilizing force. That turned out to be a really good decision, right?
Yeah, and the thing about Scotty Brooks, and this is something I told people, he's a calming influence. He's not somebody that gets really high. He's not somebody who gets really low. He's not somebody who's really kind of pointing the finger at himself. He's got a plan and he's got a process, and he holds people to that process, and it's putting into work. And, he's gotten these guys to kind of settle down a little bit and put in the work, and they're starting to see success. And, it's one of those things when you're in the boat and there's water coming in, you start going, boy, we're sinking. At some point you change the dynamic and go, no, we just need to bail the water out. And, that's the mindset, is not letting the negativity bring you down, is use the negativity to get better. And that's what the Wizards have done. And I think that's the characteristics of Scotty Brooks as a person. When you sit down and talk with him, he's always wildly optimistic, and, he's blessed to be where he's at, and he knows it. So he doesn't take himself too seriously. And, they really worked hard at this. And like I said, when I spoke to some of the Wizards guys earlier in the season, they said this was going to happen, was we're going to get right. And Scotty was a big part of that.
Steve Kyler joining us here from Basketball Insiders. You can follow his journey out on Twitter. Tens of thousands do at Steve Kyler NBA, as well as at BasketballInsiders.com. Now, the Wizards, they get a little home cooking, then they're going to go on the road. New York, Detroit, Charlotte this week, out to Atlanta and New Orleans, and a little bit of a southern thing next week after seeing the Celtics. The Knicks, they're going to be at the Garden this week. this thing's always such a hot mess, right? I mean, I was up in New York about 8 weeks ago with my wife's donor. We met Dirk Nowitzki at the Garden, and my wife's donor's German. I know I told you that story. And, when I got to a Knicks game, I had never been to a New York Knicks game before, and I thought, well, they've sucked for so long in so many ways, and there's been so much drama, around them that they feel from the outside to me to be sort of irrelevant. And then you go to the Garden, you realize how many Knicks fans there are, and Spike Lee on the court, and actors and beautiful people, and there's this energy, and you just think, well, it's a shame if they suck, and they always hire the big names. They always have big name players, big name coaches, and there's always egos flying there somewhere at 33rd and 6th, right? I mean, some thoughts about what at any point they have a great player right now, a Baltimore guy, by the way, that they can't seem to sort of get along with in any way, right?
Yeah, the Knicks, unfortunately, and we see this a lot in sports, is, you've got this amazing market, and you've got this amazing business and all of this interest, and, we can't just be bad. We can't. We got to make a quick fix. And if you look at the history of the Knicks with, James Dolan as the owner, it's been, as you said, splashy hire after splashy hire, impatience with the process, trade away the future for the now, take gambles and big money gambles, and it just doesn't work.
Well, and the other part is reacting to dysfunction with more dysfunction. Our government should learn something from that. But
again, back to the boat is sinking. They just keep figuring out ways to take on more water. Look, I liked some of the moves that they did. I thought the Derrick Rose trade was a dare-to-be-great move. It didn't cost them anything. They didn't give up anybody that was kind of a core. They weren't married to him in the long term. He had every reason to play well for them. They needed an impact guy at the point guard position. If this thing went south, he's cap space. So that one didn't, I was okay with that one. The Joakim Noah, I thought Joakim Noah with a year off with the shoulder surgery would come back with a little more juice and a little more bounce. But I think we've seen that maybe Tom Thibodeau did run him into the ground. He's not that guy anymore. And they're married to him on a big, ugly deal. And then the Carmelo thing. And, this is everywhere Carmelo's gone, as he puts up crazy numbers and he can score, and he's certainly an all-star in terms of his ability, but not a very good team player, and his team haven't done very well with him as kind of the focal point. And, now you've got, the Zen Master and Phil Jackson sitting at the top, and this thing has just gone ugly again. And, I guess the good news for the Knicks is they're healthy for the most part. Kristaps Porzingis is nursing a sore Achilles, but it's not bad. He'll be back. And they're really only 4 games out. And in the East, 4 games is not a lot. And the team does have some star power, but, the circus around them just never stops. And I think some of that's a product of the market and the media. But the other part of it is just they keep giving the media reasons. It's one thing after the other with the Knicks. And it's hard to win when you're good and balanced. It's even harder when you have external pressure that the Knicks bring on themselves.
In the case of Phil Jackson, is there anybody that he's sort of Yoda, right? Like, is there anybody that's going to tell him he's wrong? And should they tell him he's wrong? Because chances are over, 30 years, he's not wrong much. You know what I mean? Like, if he told me the sky was green, I'd say it must be green today. I mean, that's just kind of the way I view it. But I'm not a $200 million NBA player wanting to see the world through my own lens. It seems to me when you bring a guy like Jackson in, part of it is just do what he tells you to do. There's a track record there.
Unfortunately, that is not how it's worked out at all for the Knicks. Carmelo Anthony has pushed back on the triangle. They don't want to run it. Derrick Rose doesn't want to run it. They tried to force it down everybody's throat with Derek Fisher last year. Jeff Hornacek is moving away from it. There are still some principles of the triangle that they run, but they're doing a lot more traditional basketball. And that flies in the face of really everything Phil Jackson believes in. And I think that, one, the way Phil kind of carries himself and, some of the way he chooses to communicate and the things that he chooses to, is not, the politician. Phil Jackson's never been a politician. He's going to say what he's thinking because, as you said, he's got 11 championship rings. Who are you to talk to me about it? And, the truth of it is I don't think some of the players really buy into it. I think they respect what he's done in his career, but I don't think they respect what he's doing as an executive. And we've seen this is, just because you were a great player doesn't mean you'll be a great executive. Michael Jordan struggled with that. Just because you were a great coach doesn't mean you can transition into the front office. And I think we're seeing that play out with Phil Jackson, but it's not done yet. I think we'll see. The unfortunate part is, he's paid $12 million a season. That's the highest in the executive ranks. He's got a long-term contract. Are you going to fire him? I mean, I don't think the Knicks will do that. Maybe in the offseason, I think we've seen James Dolan be impatient. But, there's not anybody to say anything to him because he's top of the food chain.
Well, right, and at some point you got inmates and running the asylum, and maybe you need to find new inmates. I don't know what to say. If you want to come in and run a system, and they refuse to run the system, and they're making $20 million a year. I mean. Who's running the show? And this is an age-old problem in the NBA, right? I mean, it's the places where you can find the Zen master, and Popovich can get what he wants, and and obviously the Warriors can play a team kind of game that we can all see that from the outside. But hell, LeBron got the coach fired. LeBron picked the coach in Cleveland last year, so that's kind of the way the league works in other places, right?
It is. And the one thing I can tell you, in 2 decades covering this league is that dysfunction never works. It just never does.
Fair enough.
The teams that win are the teams that are all in it the same way. Everybody's rowing in the same direction, has the same goals. When somebody else is trying to do their own thing, their own way, it never works. You might win a couple of games. Maybe you're good enough to sneak into the 8th seed. But when you look at why some of these teams can't get out of their own way or in the lottery every year, it's not the talent equation. A lot of times it's not the coaching equation. It's just they're not on the same page. And the Knicks are where they are, not because they lack talent. It's because they're not on the same page.
Great observations from Steve Kyler. You can follow his journey out at Basketball Insiders as well as Steve Kyler NBA. All right, man, last thing, and I usually begin with this, but it's Cleveland and Golden State, right? I mean, it feels like, and that's the hardest part of the NBA to buy into a Milwaukee Bucks Indiana Pacers game on a Tuesday night is you really do get the feeling these teams can't win.
Well, I think the one thing is yes, barring major injury or something we just don't understand happening, it's going to likely be the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Golden State Warriors, but it is the journey to get there. And, along the way, there's some amazing shows that play out when you see what, Giannis Antetokounmpo is doing in Milwaukee. It's incredible basketball. This guy's an amazing player. But I think we also saw this last year, too, is that the unexpected can and does happen. Who thought the Oklahoma City Thunder were going to take the Golden State Warriors to 7 games and maybe win that series? They were a couple of bad decisions away from winning that series. So, it is about getting through 82 games as healthy as you can be and then starting that process in the playoffs. And, we saw it, that Dallas Mavericks team that, Dirk Nowitzki wins the MVP but got bounced by the 8th seed, and that team had won as many games as anybody in the NBA that year. So, we see it that it's very much like the March tournament. If you're not hot, if you're not rolling when you get into the postseason, you should go home early.
Or not healthy in the case of maybe the LA Clippers. Hey, great having you on, Steve. It's always a wonderful visit with you. We'll send everybody out to Basketball Insiders, and we'll check in soon. Let me know if Wizards keep winning, you're going to have to make a trip up here from Tampa, right?
As soon as it warms up.
That's a hell of a decision on your part. Stay down there. Hey, man, we'll see you soon. Thanks for coming on.
Anytime.
You got it. Steve Kyler from Basketball Insiders and Steve Kyler NBA out on Twitter. You can find me out in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. You can always find me if you're interested in our London trip or any of the Ravens road trips we're doing. Nasty at WNST.net finds me there. Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram. We stream live on Facebook Live as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. And we'll deliver our morning newspaper to your email inbox each and every morning at 7 a.m. All you have to do is sign up at WNST.net. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. And our text service is our best service. It's our breaking news service. We've been doing it for 10 years. Bigger and better than anyone. You want the breaking news first, trades, injuries, big news. Sign up at WNST.net. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. And don't forget, Dennis will be here on Thursday, driving you home and getting you ready for the weekend. We're going to be in Houston for Super Bowl 51. Luke and I will be down there for a full week of radio, kicking 105.7's ass, as we've done now like every year. So we're looking forward to that as well. I'll be writing a little bit about that Super Bowl week and hoping to God the Patriots aren't there. Not that I want to see the Steelers, mind you, but that's my personal preference. So, have at it. Those of you think that you want the Patriots, trust me, I don't need any more Belichick and Brady. Not that I'm looking forward to Ben Roethlisberger, but, we got two different evils here, so we'll figure it all out next week. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.